Millionaire secretly dates a janitor, his family's reaction will leave you in tears. Ethan glanced at his reflection in the mirror, adjusting his cufflinks for what felt like the 100th time. The Sterling family dinner was a monthly spectacle of wealth, power, and influence, an unspoken competition to outdo one another. Normally, Ethan managed to blend in, nodding politely through conversations about stock markets and luxury yachts. But tonight, his mind was elsewhere. His phone buzzed on the dresser. He picked it up, his lips curving into a smile as he read the message. "Good luck at dinner. Don't forget to breathe." Sophia's texts always had a calming effect on him. She had a way of grounding him, reminding him of the simpler joys in life. He quickly typed back, "Wish you were here," before slipping the phone into his pocket. "Ethan?" His mother's voice echoed down the hallway. "Are you ready? The guests are arriving." "Yes, Mother," he called back, taking one last glance in the mirror before heading downstairs. The grand dining hall was already buzzing with chatter. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a warm glow, casting reflections off the polished marble floors. Waitstaff moved seamlessly between guests, offering trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Ethan's mother, Margaret Sterling, stood near the entrance, greeting each guest with a practiced smile. She was the epitome of grace and poise, her tailored gown and flawless makeup reinforcing her status as the matriarch of the Sterling Empire. When she spotted Ethan, her smile faltered slightly. "You're late," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Punctuality is a virtue, Ethan." "I know, Mother," he replied, kissing her cheek. "I got caught up with some work." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't press the issue. "Come. There are people I want you to meet." Ethan followed her reluctantly, his thoughts drifting back to Sophia. He hated the pretense of these events, the shallow conversations and constant need to impress. With Sophia, everything was different. She didn't care about his wealth or status. In fact, she often teased him about it, calling him Mr. Fancy Shoes whenever he showed up in designer loafers. As the evening progressed, Ethan found himself trapped in a conversation with his cousin Alexander, who was boasting about his latest real estate acquisition. "It's a prime location," Alexander was saying, gesturing animatedly. "Right in the heart of downtown. Cost a fortune, but it'll pay off in spades." Ethan nodded absently, his gaze drifting toward the large windows. He imagined Sophia at her night shift, mopping floors and humming to herself. She always hummed when she thought no one was listening, a habit he found endearing. "Ethan, are you even listening?" Alexander's voice snapped him back to the present. Of course, Ethan lied. "Sounds like a solid investment." Alexander smirked. "You should come see it sometime. Maybe bring that mystery woman you've been hiding from us." Ethan froze. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, come on," Alexander said, leaning in conspiratorially. "You've been acting different lately. Distracted. I'd bet good money there's a woman involved." Ethan forced a laugh. "You've been watching too many movies?" But Alexander's words stuck with him. Was he that transparent? He'd been careful to keep his relationship with Sophia private, knowing how his family would react. They valued pedigree and social connections above all else. A janitor didn't fit their idea of an acceptable partner. After dinner, Ethan excused himself and stepped outside for some air. The cool night breeze was a welcome relief from the stuffy dining hall. He pulled out his phone and dialed Sophia. "Hey," she answered, her voice bright despite the late hour. "How's the fancy dinner?" "Exhausting," Ethan admitted. "I wish you were here." Sophia laughed softly. "I doubt I'd fit in." "You'd be surprised," he said. "You have a way of charming people." "Maybe," she replied. "But I think your mother might disagree." Ethan sighed. "She doesn't know you, Sophia. If she did, she'd see what I see." "And what do you see?" she teased, though her voice held a hint of vulnerability. "I see someone who's kind, smart, and stronger than anyone I've ever met," Ethan said without hesitation. "Someone who makes me want to be better." There was a pause on the line, and when Sophia spoke again, her voice was softer. "You always know what to say, don't you?" "Only because it's true," Ethan replied. "Listen, I've been thinking, maybe it's time we stop hiding. I want my family to know about us." Sophia's breath hitched. "Ethan, are you sure? You know how they'll react." "I don't care," he said firmly. "I'm tired of pretending. I love you, Sophia. And it's time they knew." The line fell silent for a moment before Sophia finally responded, her voice filled with apprehension. "Ethan, I love you too. But your family, they're not like us. They'll never accept me." Ethan leaned against the balcony railing, staring out into the garden. The soft glow of lanterns illuminated the perfectly manicured hedges, a stark contrast to the life Sophia lived. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "They'll come around once they see how amazing you are. They just need to meet you." Sophia hesitated. "And what if they don't?" "Then that's their loss," Ethan replied, his tone resolute. "You mean more to me than their approval ever could." Sophia let out a soft sigh, a mix of relief and fear. "Okay," she said finally. "If you think it's time, then I trust you." Ethan smiled, his chest swelling with determination. "It's time." The next morning, Ethan sat at the head of the long dining table in the family's breakfast room. His parents, Margaret and Charles, were seated on either side, sipping their coffee while skimming through newspapers. His younger sister, Olivia, was scrolling through her phone, occasionally making small talk about upcoming social events. Ethan cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "I need to talk to you all about something important." Margaret folded her newspaper neatly, her sharp gaze locking onto him. "What is it, darling?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I've been seeing someone. For a while now." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Well, it's about time." "Who is she? Someone we know?" "No, you don't know her," Ethan admitted. "Her name is Sophia, and she works as a janitor." The room fell silent, the clinking of Olivia's spoon against her coffee cup the only sound. Margaret's eyes widened, her composure momentarily slipping. "A janitor?" she repeated as if the word were foreign. "Yes," Ethan said firmly. "And she's the most incredible person I've ever met." Charles set his coffee cup down with a sharp clink, his expression darkening. "Ethan, you can't be serious. Do you have any idea what this could do to our reputation?" "Our reputation?" Ethan's voice rose slightly. "This isn't about our reputation, Dad. It's about me, about my happiness." Margaret leaned forward, her tone calm but laced with disapproval. "Ethan, darling, we're not saying you can't be happy. But you need to think about the bigger picture. Our family name carries weight. The people you associate with reflect on all of us." Olivia finally looked up from her phone, her expression a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "Wait, are you actually in love with her?" "Yes," Ethan said without hesitation. "And I won't hide her anymore." Margaret exchanged a glance with Charles, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Ethan, you're a grown man and we can't control your choices. But you need to understand the consequences. This relationship will raise questions. It will invite scrutiny." Ethan stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Let them scrutinize. I'm done living my life for other people's expectations." Without another word, he left the room, his heart pounding. He knew this was just the beginning of the battle. Later that week, Ethan invited Sophia to dinner at his apartment, a small, cozy space he kept as an escape from the opulence of the family mansion. He wanted to prepare her for what was to come. Sophia arrived wearing a simple dress, her nervousness evident in the way she fidgeted with her purse strap. "Are you sure about this?" she asked as Ethan greeted her at the door. "Absolutely," he said, pulling her into a comforting embrace. "You have nothing to worry about." They sat down to eat, the flickering candlelight casting a warm glow over the room. Ethan explained what had happened with his family, leaving out the harsher details to spare her feelings. Sophia listened quietly, her brow furrowed. "I don't want to be the reason you're at odds with your family, Ethan." "You're not," he assured her. "If anything, this is forcing them to see how narrow-minded they've been. Maybe it's exactly what they need." Sophia gave him a small smile, though her unease lingered. "I hope you're right." The following weekend, Ethan arranged for Sophia to meet his family at a private dinner. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to stand by her side. When they arrived at the mansion, the tension was palpable. Margaret greeted them at the door, her smile forced and her gaze appraising as she took in Sophia's modest attire. "Welcome," Margaret said, her tone cordial but cold. "Ethan has told us a lot about you." "Thank you for having me," Sophia replied politely, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. The dinner that followed was a minefield of subtle jabs and veiled insults. Charles questioned Sophia about her work, his tone dripping with condescension. Margaret steered the conversation toward Ethan's past relationships, pointedly highlighting women from prominent families. But Sophia held her ground. She answered their questions with grace, refusing to let their judgmental stares shake her. Ethan watched her with admiration, his resolve to protect her strengthening with every passing moment. By the time dessert was served, the tension had reached a breaking point. Olivia, who had been unusually quiet throughout the evening, finally spoke up. "You know, I think Sophia's pretty cool," she said, looking directly at her parents. "Maybe you two should give her a chance instead of acting like snobs." Margaret gasped softly, while Charles looked as though he'd been slapped. Ethan couldn't help but smile at his sister's unexpected support. "Thank you, Olivia," Sophia said, her voice filled with gratitude. Ethan reached for her hand under the table, giving it a reassuring squeeze. This was only the beginning, but for the first time, he felt hope that they could overcome whatever obstacles lay ahead. The days following the dinner were a whirlwind of emotions. Ethan's parents remained cold and distant, their disapproval unmistakable. Despite Olivia's support, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking on eggshells every time she was near the family. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed more determined than ever to stand by her side, even if it meant severing ties with his family. At the mansion, Margaret and Charles held a private discussion in the study. The room, adorned with dark mahogany furniture and shelves lined with leather-bound books, was a sanctuary where serious matters were discussed. "This cannot go on, Charles," Margaret said, pacing the room. "Our son is jeopardizing everything we've built. The Sterling name carries weight, power, and he's dragging it through the mud." Charles leaned back in his chair, his expression grave. "I agree, but what can we do? Ethan has made it clear he won't back down." Margaret stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing. "Then we'll have to make it clear to him what's at stake. If he continues this relationship, he'll lose everything. The inheritance, his position at the company, everything." Charles nodded slowly. "It's harsh, but perhaps it's the wake-up call he needs." Meanwhile, Ethan and Sophia spent their days planning their future together. They visited the local shelter where Sophia had once worked as a volunteer, discussing ways to support the organization. Ethan was inspired by her passion for helping others, and he began to see the world from a new perspective, one that valued kindness over status. One evening, as they walked through the city hand in hand, Sophia hesitated before speaking. "Ethan, are you sure you're ready for what's coming? Your parents, they won't stop until they get their way." Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her. "Sophia, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I don't care about their money or their approval. All I care about is us." Sophia smiled, though the worry in her eyes lingered. "You're incredible, you know that?" "No," Ethan replied, pulling her closer. "You're the incredible one." A few days later, Margaret invited Ethan to the mansion under the guise of a casual lunch. Sophia encouraged him to go, hoping it might be an opportunity for reconciliation. But when Ethan arrived, he quickly realized his parents had other plans. As they sat in the grand dining room, Margaret wasted no time getting to the point. "Ethan, we need to talk about your future." "I thought that's what we were doing," Ethan replied, his tone guarded. Charles cleared his throat. "Son, your relationship with Sophia is problematic. It's causing unnecessary attention and not the kind we want." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Unnecessary attention? Or are you worried it's exposing the flaws in our so-called perfect family?" "Ethan," Margaret interjected sharply, "this isn't about us. It's about you, and the legacy you're throwing away." "I'm not throwing anything away," Ethan shot back. "I'm building something real, something meaningful." Charles sighed heavily. "We hoped you'd see reason, but if you insist on continuing this relationship, you'll leave us no choice. You'll be cut off financially, professionally, everything." Ethan's heart pounded, but his voice remained steady. "Do you really think that will change anything?" "If anything, it just proves how little you understand me." Margaret's expression softened for a moment, but she quickly masked it with resolve. "We're trying to protect you, Ethan. You'll see that one day." Ethan stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "I see it clearly now. You're not protecting me, you're protecting yourselves. And I won't be part of it anymore." Without another word, he walked out, leaving his parents stunned. Back at their apartment, Ethan recounted the confrontation to Sophia. She listened quietly, her hands trembling as she realized the enormity of what he had done. "Ethan, you've given up everything for me," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "What if I'm not worth it?" Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his gaze unwavering. "You are worth more than anything I've ever had. Don't ever doubt that." They held each other tightly, their resolve stronger than ever. But the challenges were far from over. The media had caught wind of the family's internal conflict, and headlines about the Sterling scandal were plastered across tabloids and social media. Sophia became the target of cruel comments and invasive questions from strangers. Paparazzi followed her to work, snapping photos and shouting demeaning remarks. Despite her thick skin, the constant scrutiny began to wear her down. One evening, as they sat together in their small living room, Sophia finally broke down. "I don't know how much more of this I can take," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I never wanted to be in the spotlight. I just wanted to be with you." Ethan held her close, his heart breaking at her pain. "We'll get through this," he promised. "Together." After that dinner, tensions within the Sterling household only grew. While Olivia's support had been a small victory, Margaret and Charles were far from convinced. Ethan could feel the weight of their disapproval every time he visited the mansion. Subtle remarks and cold silences filled the air, but he refused to let it deter him. Sophia, on the other hand, was dealing with her own challenges. Word about her relationship with Ethan had started to spread, and not everyone was supportive. Her co-workers were divided. Some encouraged her, telling her she deserved happiness, while others whispered behind her back, questioning her motives. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, Sophia found herself sitting on a park bench, staring out at the city lights. The weight of everything, the judgment, the scrutiny, the uncertainty, was beginning to take its toll. When her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan, she hesitated before picking it up. "Thinking of you. Let's talk when you're free," the message read. She smiled faintly and called him. He answered almost immediately. "Sophia, hey. How was your day?" "It was fine," she lied, not wanting to worry him. "How about you?" "Better now that I'm hearing your voice," he said, his tone warm. "Are you okay? You sound tired." "I'm fine," she repeated, though her voice betrayed her. "Just a lot on my mind." "Why don't I come over?" he offered. "We can talk or not talk, whatever you need." Sophia hesitated, but the thought of seeing him was too comforting to resist. "Okay," she said. "I'd like that." When Ethan arrived, he brought a bag of takeout and her favorite coffee. They sat on her small couch, the aroma of the food filling the room as they ate in comfortable silence. "Tell me what's bothering you," Ethan said, eventually breaking the quiet. Sophia sighed, setting her coffee cup down. "It's just everything. Your family, my co-workers, the looks people give us when we're together. It's like everyone's waiting for me to mess up, to prove I'm not good enough." Ethan reached for her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Sophia, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. You're more than enough just as you are." She looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But what if I'm not enough for you?" "You are," he said firmly. "You always have been and you always will be. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." His words were a balm to her soul, and for the first time in days she felt a glimmer of hope. Meanwhile, back at the Sterling mansion, Margaret was plotting. She wasn't willing to let her son's relationship with Sophia continue without a fight. She called in favors from her social circle, gathering information on Sophia's past. If she could find a reason, any reason, to convince Ethan to end things, she would. But what she found shocked her. Among the papers and reports delivered to her by a private investigator was a photograph of Sophia as a young girl, standing next to a man Margaret recognized instantly. It was an old acquaintance from her youth, a man who had been involved in a scandal that Margaret had gone to great lengths to cover up. Margaret's hands shook as she stared at the photograph. This couldn't be a coincidence. She needed answers, and she needed them now. The next day, Margaret showed up unannounced at Sophia's apartment. Sophia was startled to find the older woman at her door, but she invited her in nonetheless. "Mrs. Sterling," Sophia said cautiously. "What brings you here?" Margaret didn't waste any time. She placed the photograph on the coffee table and looked Sophia directly in the eyes. "Tell me about him," she demanded. Sophia froze, her gaze fixed on the photograph. It was a picture of her father, a man she hadn't seen or spoken to in years. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's not important," Margaret said sharply. "What matters is who he is and what he's done. I need to know everything." Sophia swallowed hard, her hands trembling. He left when I was a child," she said. "I don't know much about him, other than that he got into some trouble before he disappeared." Margaret's expression softened slightly, but her resolve remained. "You need to understand, Sophia, that my family's reputation is at stake. If your connection to him comes to light, it could ruin everything." Sophia felt a surge of anger. "I have nothing to do with him," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I've built my life on my own, without his help or influence. Whatever he did has nothing to do with me." Margaret studied her for a moment, then stood. "I believe you," she said finally. "But others might not be so understanding. If you truly care about Ethan, you'll think about what this could mean for him." With that, she left, leaving Sophia alone with her thoughts. When Ethan came over later that evening, Sophia told him everything. He listened intently, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "This changes nothing," he said firmly. "Whatever your father did has nothing to do with you. And if my mother thinks she can use this to come between us, she's wrong. But what if it does affect you? Sophia asked, her voice trembling. What if people start judging you because of me? Let them, Ethan said. I don't care what anyone thinks as long as I have you. Sophia smiled through her tears, feeling a renewed sense of strength. Together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The dinner ended with an uneasy truce. While Margaret and Charles maintained their polite but frosty demeanor, Olivia's unexpected support had shifted the dynamic slightly. Ethan walked Sophia out to the car, his arm protectively around her. I'm sorry about tonight, he said, his voice heavy with guilt. I knew it would be hard, but I didn't think they'd be so judgmental. Sophia finished, giving him a small, sad smile. Ethan, it's okay. I knew what I was walking into. I'm just glad you were there with me. He cupped her face gently, his eyes searching hers. You're incredible, you know that? I don't care what they think. I'm not giving up on us. Sophia leaned into his touch, her heart aching with a mixture of love and fear. I'm not giving up either. The next morning, Ethan received a call from his mother. Her tone was clipped, her words carefully chosen. Ethan, your father and I need to talk to you. Alone. Can you come to the house this afternoon? Ethan sighed. He had anticipated this. I'll be there. When he arrived, Margaret and Charles were waiting in the study, their expressions a mix of frustration and concern. Margaret spoke first. Ethan, we need to understand what's going on. This woman. What are you thinking? Do you honestly believe she belongs in our world? Ethan's jaw tightened. This isn't about whether she belongs in your world. It's about the fact that she belongs in mine. Sophia makes me happy, and that should be enough for you. Charles leaned forward, his voice stern. Ethan, you're being naive. This relationship is a liability. People will talk. Our business partners, our investors, they'll see this as a weakness. A weakness. Ethan repeated, incredulous. Loving someone is a weakness? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Margaret placed a hand on Charles's arm as if to calm him before turning back to Ethan. We're not trying to hurt you, darling. But you have to see the bigger picture. Your choices affect more than just yourself. Ethan stood, his hands clenched at his sides. You're right. My choices do affect others. They affect Sophia. And I won't let her be treated like she's less than anyone else just because she didn't grow up with money. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. You're making a mistake, Ethan. Maybe I am, he shot back. But it's my mistake to make. Meanwhile, Sophia was dealing with her own challenges. The story of her relationship with Ethan had somehow leaked to the press, and her quiet life was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. Paparazzi began appearing outside her apartment building, shouting questions and snapping photos whenever she stepped outside. At work, her co-workers whispered behind her back, their curiosity mingled with jealousy and disbelief. One of them, a janitor named Carla, approached her during a break. Is it true? Carla asked, her voice a mix of awe and skepticism. You're dating Ethan Sterling? Sophia hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Yes, it's true. Carla let out a low whistle. Wow. I mean, good for you, but are you sure about this? Guys like him don't usually end up with girls like us. Sophia's heart sank at the words, though she knew Carla didn't mean them maliciously. I know it seems impossible, she said softly. But Ethan isn't like other guys. He sees me for who I am, not what I do. Carla nodded, though her expression remained doubtful. Well, I hope you're right. Just be careful, okay? People like us don't usually get fairy tale endings. Ethan was furious when he learned about the media intrusion. He confronted his family, certain they had been the source of the leak. Who told the press about Sophia? He demanded, storming into the dining room where Margaret and Charles were seated. Margaret's eyes widened in genuine surprise. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Ethan snapped. Someone leaked the story and it wasn't me or Sophia. Charles frowned. Ethan, we would never do something like that. As much as we disapprove of this situation, we wouldn't stoop so low. Ethan studied their faces, searching for signs of deceit, but found none. If it hadn't been them, then who? The thought gnawed at him as he left the house, his mind racing. He called Sophia as soon as he got into his car. Are you okay? I'm fine, she said, though her voice wavered slightly. It's just a lot to deal with. I'm not used to this kind of attention. I'll find out who's responsible, Ethan promised. And I'll make sure they pay for what they've done. The dinner ended with polite goodbyes, though the tension in the room was far from resolved. As they walked back to Ethan's car, Sophia let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Well, she said, managing a small smile. That could have gone worse. Ethan shook his head. They don't deserve you, Sophia. The way they spoke to you. It's okay, she interrupted gently. I knew it wouldn't be easy. But I'm not giving up on us. Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. You shouldn't have to fight for their approval. If they can't see how incredible you are, then that's their problem. Sophia placed a hand on his chest, her touch grounding him. We'll take it one day at a time. They might come around eventually. The following weeks were a roller coaster of emotions. Ethan's family alternated between outright disapproval and calculated attempts to dissuade him from continuing the relationship. Margaret invited him to lunch under the guise of catching up, only to present a carefully curated list of suitable matches for him to consider. Charles, meanwhile, threatened to re-evaluate Ethan's position in the family business if he didn't end things with Sophia. You're putting everything at risk for someone who doesn't belong in our world, Charles said during one particularly heated argument. Think about the company, Ethan. Think about your future. Ethan's jaw tightened. My future is with Sophia. If you can't accept that, then maybe I don't belong in this family. Charles's face darkened, but he said nothing more, his silence speaking volumes. Despite the mounting pressure, Ethan and Sophia's bond only grew stronger. They found solace in each other, their shared moments offering a respite from the chaos surrounding them. Ethan took her to places where they could simply be themselves, a quiet park where they picnicked under the shade of an old oak tree, a cozy cafe tucked away from prying eyes. One evening as they strolled through the park, Sophia stopped and turned to him. Ethan, are you sure about this? About us? He frowned, taken aback. Of course I'm sure. Why would you even ask that? Sophia hesitated, her gaze fixed on the ground. Because I see how much it's costing you. Your family, your position. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything. Ethan cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. Sophia, listen to me. You're not the reason for anything. My family's expectations, their obsession with status. That's their problem, not yours. You've shown me what's really important in life. I'm not losing anything by choosing you. I'm gaining everything. Her eyes filled with tears and she nodded, leaning into his touch. Okay, she whispered. Then we keep fighting. Meanwhile, cracks began to form within the Sterling family. Olivia, who had initially been indifferent, became one of Sophia's staunchest allies. She visited them at Ethan's apartment, bringing homemade cookies and stories about her own frustrations with their parents. They've always been like this, Olivia said one evening, sipping tea at their tiny kitchen table. It's all about appearances and maintaining control. Honestly, I admire you both for standing up to them. I've never had the guts to do it. Sophia smiled, touched by Olivia's support. It means a lot to have you on our side. You're not just on our side, Ethan added, grinning. You're leading the charge. Olivia laughed, but her expression turned serious. I wish I could do more. They listen to me even less than they listen to you. You've already done plenty, Sophia assured her. Just knowing we're not alone makes a difference. The turning point came when an unexpected ally emerged. Margaret's younger sister Lillian, who had long been estranged from the family, reached out to Ethan after reading about his relationship in the tabloids. I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of their judgment, Lillian said when they met at a quiet cafe. I left because I couldn't live under their thumb anymore. But I admire you, Ethan. You're standing up for what you believe in, and that's not something they'll ever understand. Ethan listened intently as Lillian recounted her own struggles with the family, her words resonating deeply. If there's anything I can do to help, she offered, just say the word. Actually, Ethan said, a plan forming in his mind, there might be something. Over the next few days, Ethan and Lillian worked together to organize a family meeting, framing it as a chance to mend old wounds. Margaret and Charles were skeptical but ultimately agreed, curious about Lillian's sudden reappearance. The meeting took place in the Sterling Mansion's grand sitting room, the air thick with tension. Lillian spoke first, sharing her experiences and urging the family to re-evaluate their priorities. Ethan isn't just your son, she said, addressing Margaret and Charles directly. He's a person with his own dreams, his own values. If you can't support him in this, you're not just losing a son, you're losing the chance to grow as a family. Her words struck a chord, though it was clear that changing their minds wouldn't happen overnight. As the night wore on, the tension in the room began to settle, though the unease still lingered in the air. Margaret excused herself to take a phone call, leaving Charles to sit stiffly at the head of the table, occasionally glancing at Sophia as though trying to decipher her presence in their world. Olivia, on the other hand, seemed genuinely intrigued. So, how did you two meet? she asked, leaning forward with a smile that put Sophia at ease. Ethan grinned, glancing at Sophia as if to silently ask permission to tell the story. When she nodded, he began, "It was at the corporate office. Sophia works there." "As a janitor?" Charles interjected, his tone sharp. "Yes, as a janitor," Ethan affirmed, refusing to let his father's disdain overshadow the story. "I'd had a terrible day, and while I was waiting for the elevator, I overheard her humming a tune. It was calming, something I didn't realize I needed in that moment. We started talking, and I don't know, she just had this way of making everything feel lighter." Sophia blushed slightly, but she met Olivia's gaze with a small smile. "I didn't think much of it at first. He seemed too polished for someone like me. But he kept showing up, asking questions about my life, my family. He didn't act like he was better than me, and that caught me off guard." Olivia laughed softly. "That sounds like Ethan. Always breaking the mold." Charles let out a quiet huff, his disapproval evident. "And you thought it was appropriate to pursue a relationship under those circumstances, Ethan? What about company policy?" "We were careful," Ethan said, his tone calm but firm. "And for the record, Dad, I don't think love should be dictated by titles or policies." Sophia straightened in her chair, her confidence growing. "I understand that my job might not seem impressive to you, Mr. Sterling, but I take pride in what I do. I work hard, and I've always believed that everyone deserves respect, no matter their position." Charles raised an eyebrow, but before he could respond, Margaret returned to the room, her expression unreadable. "What did I miss?" "Just a discussion about love and titles," Olivia said breezily, clearly enjoying the tension she was stirring. Margaret's gaze flickered between Ethan and Sophia before she took her seat. "Sophia, you must understand that our concern comes from a place of love for Ethan. We've spent our lives building a legacy, and we want to ensure that it's protected." Sophia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I understand, Mrs. Sterling. And I want you to know that I'm not here to take anything from Ethan or your family. I care about him because of who he is, not what he has." The sincerity in her voice caught Margaret off guard. For a brief moment, her steely exterior softened, though it was quickly replaced by her usual composure. "Well, time will tell." As Ethan and Sophia drove home that night, the weight of the evening settled over them. Sophia stared out the window, her thoughts swirling. "Do you think they'll ever accept me?" Ethan reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "They don't have a choice, Sophia. I love you, and I won't let anyone come between us." Sophia smiled faintly, though doubt still lingered in her eyes. "It's just hard, you know? Feeling like I don't belong." "You belong with me," Ethan said firmly. "And that's all that matters." The following weeks were a whirlwind of highs and lows. While Olivia became an unexpected ally, even visiting Sophia at work to get to know her better, Charles and Margaret remained distant. They rarely spoke of the relationship, but their disapproval was evident in their subtle remarks and icy demeanor. Sophia threw herself into her work, determined not to let their judgment affect her. Ethan, meanwhile, began making changes within the company, inspired by Sophia's perspective. He implemented new policies to ensure fair treatment for all employees, regardless of their roles. One afternoon, Ethan invited Sophia to join him at a company gala. It was a bold move, one that he knew would draw attention, but he wanted to show the world, and his family, that he was proud of her. The night of the gala, Sophia stood in front of the mirror in a simple yet elegant dress Ethan had picked out for her. She felt out of place, but Ethan's reassuring words echoed in her mind, "You belong." When they arrived at the venue, all eyes turned to them. Whispers rippled through the crowd as Ethan introduced Sophia to colleagues and clients. Some were polite, others barely hid their judgment, but Ethan stayed by her side, his presence unwavering. As the evening progressed, Sophia began to relax, even enjoying herself as she mingled with the guests. But her confidence wavered when she spotted Margaret and Charles entering the room. They approached slowly, their expressions unreadable. "Ethan," Margaret said, her tone neutral. "Sophia." "Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Sterling," Sophia said politely, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. Margaret looked at her for a long moment before finally speaking. "I'll admit, I had my doubts about you, Sophia. But seeing the way you've handled yourself tonight, it's clear you have a strength that I didn't recognize before." Sophia blinked, stunned by the unexpected compliment. "Thank you," she said softly. Charles, however, remained silent, his expression hard. Ethan didn't press him, knowing it would take time for his father to come around. As the night of the family dinner faded into memory, Sophia and Ethan's lives became a whirlwind of whispers, judgment, and unexpected alliances. The Sterling family's initial disdain for Sophia had reached the ears of society's elite, sparking a media frenzy. Gossip columns painted her as everything from a gold digger to a courageous underdog, while Ethan's decision to stand by her became a topic of national intrigue. Sophia, however, remained grounded. She focused on her work at the shelter and avoided the tabloids. But the pressure was mounting, and Ethan could see it in her eyes. One evening he found her sitting in their small garden, staring at the stars. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, sitting beside her. She sighed, resting her head on his shoulder. "I didn't realize how exhausting it would be to prove I belong in your world." "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," Ethan said, taking her hand. "You belong because you're you. And if they can't see that, it's their problem, not ours." Sophia smiled weakly, but her doubts lingered. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing me over your family?" "Never," Ethan replied without hesitation. "You've taught me what real love and courage look like. I wouldn't trade that for anything." The turning point came when Margaret Sterling called unexpectedly, inviting them to a charity gala hosted by the family. Sophia hesitated, unsure if she could face such an audience again. But Ethan encouraged her, seeing the invitation as a sign that his mother was trying to make amends. On the night of the gala, Sophia wore a simple yet elegant dress Ethan had bought for her. As they entered the grand ballroom, heads turned, and the room fell momentarily silent. Sophia felt every gaze on her, but Ethan's reassuring grip on her hand gave her strength. Margaret greeted them at the entrance, her smile more genuine than before. "Sophia, I'm glad you could make it," she said, her tone softer than usual. "Thank you for inviting me," Sophia replied, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. The evening progressed more smoothly than expected. While some guests whispered behind their champagne glasses, others approached Sophia with curiosity and even admiration. Ethan's sister, Olivia, stayed close by, offering support and quipping jokes to lighten the mood. Then came the highlight of the evening, a speech from Margaret. As she stepped onto the stage, the room quieted. "Tonight, we celebrate not just charity but the resilience of the human spirit," Margaret began. "I've always believed in the importance of legacy, but recent events have reminded me that legacy isn't just about wealth or power. It's about the values we uphold and the people we choose to stand by." Her gaze swept across the room before settling on Sophia and Ethan. "My son Ethan has shown me that courage and integrity matter more than appearances. And Sophia has demonstrated grace and strength in the face of adversity. For that, I owe them both my respect." Applause erupted, and Sophia felt tears welling in her eyes. Ethan squeezed her hand, his own eyes shining with pride. In the weeks that followed, the Sterlings slowly began to accept Sophia into their fold. Margaret reached out more often, inviting her for tea and asking about her work at the shelter. Even Charles, though still reserved, softened his stance, occasionally offering a polite word or two. Sophia and Ethan's story became an inspiration to many, a testament to the power of love and perseverance. Media outlets shifted their narrative, praising the couple for breaking societal norms and challenging outdated traditions. But for Sophia and Ethan, the real victory was in the quiet moments. The laughter they shared over dinner, the late-night talks under the stars, and the unwavering support they gave each other through every challenge. 1 year later, they stood together in front of family and friends, exchanging vows in a small but beautiful ceremony. Olivia served as Sophia's maid of honor, and even Margaret shed a tear during the heartfelt speeches. As they danced under a canopy of twinkling lights, Ethan pulled Sophia close and whispered, "I told you they'd come around." Sophia laughed, resting her head on his chest. "You were right," she admitted. "But even if they hadn't, I'd still choose you." "And I'd choose you," Ethan said, kissing her forehead. "Every time." As the music played and their loved ones surrounded them, Ethan and Sophia knew they had found something far more valuable than wealth or status. A love that could weather any storm and a bond that would last a lifetime.